The crystal wineglass shattered against the hardwood floor, sending shards scattering across the dining room like ice across a frozen lake. I didn't drop it. I placed it down too hard, perhaps, but Clarissa's announcement had knocked something loose in me, something I thought was firmly bolted down. "We took a vote," she said again, her smile stretched thin across her face, "and you're no longer family." I looked around the grand dining table of my in-laws' Virginia estate. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across the faces watching me, waiting for me to break. Silas, my brother-in-law, couldn't contain his smirk. His wife Brielle actually applauded like this was some kind of perverse theater. Calvin, my father-in-law, gave a solemn nod of approval, the patriarch blessing this execution. The turkey carcass lay between us, picked nearly clean. Outside, through the bay windows, snow had begun to fall on the manicured lawns. So picturesque. So American. Perfect Thanksgiving. "I see," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "When exactly was this vote taken?" Clarissa flipped her blonde hair back, the same move she'd used when we first met 15 years ago. "Does it matter?" "It was unanimous." I nodded slowly, feeling a strange calm wash over me. For months, no years, I'd sensed this coming. The gradual cooling, the increasing demands, the whispered phone calls that stopped when I entered rooms. They'd been planning this for a long time. "So what happens now?" I asked, reaching for the cranberry sauce, adding another spoonful to my plate as if we were discussing something as mundane as the weather. "Do I just leave? Is there a formal ceremony for excommunication from the family?" Silas laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the high ceilings. "Don't be dramatic, Joel. We simply think it's best if you step away. From Clarissa, from us. From everything." Evelyn, my mother-in-law, hadn't spoken yet. She sat with her hands folded, eyes downcast, the only one showing any sign of discomfort. But not enough to object. "And the house?" I asked. "Our house," Clarissa corrected. "You'll be reasonable, of course. Sign it over. After all, I need somewhere to live. The house I paid for. The house I worked 80-hour weeks to afford. The house that was too big, too expensive, but absolutely necessary, according to Clarissa." I could feel their eyes on me, watching for cracks, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. The pathetic begging. The desperate appeals to emotion. How well they thought they knew me. "You seem very prepared," I said, putting down my fork. I reached for my bag beside the chair, the one they'd probably expected to be filled with Thanksgiving gifts. "So am I." I pulled out a thick folder and placed it next to the cranberry sauce. "Then I guess you won't need this anymore." Clarissa's smile faltered for the first time. "What is that?" "Insurance," I said. Against this exact moment, the air in the room changed like the pressure drop before a storm. Calvin straightened in his chair. Silas stopped smirking. Brielle's hands froze mid-applause. "What exactly do you mean, Joel?" Calvin asked, his authoritative voice now tinged with unease. "Open it," I told Clarissa. "Go ahead." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the folder. The first page was a bank statement. Her eyes widened as she flipped to the second page. And the third. "What is this?" she whispered. "A record. 10 years of records, actually." Clarissa's face lost its color. "You've been planning this?" "No," I said, standing up from the table. "I've been watching you plan this. There's a difference." She rifled through the pages faster now, her breathing becoming shallow. The rest of the family leaned forward, trying to glimpse what had caused her distress. "I wouldn't have needed these if you'd been honest," I continued. "But you weren't. None of you were." "Joel," Evelyn finally spoke, her voice quavering. "What have you done?" I looked at her, this woman who had welcomed me into her family with open arms 15 years ago, then gradually joined the others in seeing me as nothing more than a resource to be drained. "Nothing," I said, picking up my bag. "Compared to what you've all done." Clarissa finally found her voice, rising to her feet, the folder clutched in her white-knuckled hands. "You can't just vote me out." I finished for her. "Apparently I can. And I have." I moved toward the door, stopping one last time to look back at the tableau. The remains of the feast, the shocked faces, the scattered glass from my fallen wineglass. A perfect family portrait, missing only the veneer of decency they'd maintained until tonight. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, and walked out into the snowy night. The snowfall grew heavier as I drove away from the estate, memories flooding back with each turn of the wipers. 10 years of my life, packed into a manila folder. 10 years of being slowly, methodically bled dry. I remember the day I met Clarissa. Downtown coffee shop, spring rain tapping against the windows. She dropped her book, Constitutional Law, and I picked it up. Her smile was different then. Genuine. At least I thought so. The Golden Girl, her father called her when we were introduced. Calvin stood tall in his tailored suit, looking me over like I was a horse at auction. My Clarissa has big dreams. Big dreams that needed financing. That part became clear soon enough. The first year was a whirlwind of affection and ambition. Clarissa needed to finish law school. Top tier, nothing less would do. I can't work during school, Joel. Not with my course load. You understand, right? Her fingers traced patterns on my chest as we lay in bed. It's our future. Our investment. Such a powerful word. I picked up extra shifts at the engineering firm. Weekends, holidays, late nights hunched over drafting tables while colleagues went home to their families. My savings dwindled, then disappeared. But I believed in us, in her, in our future. When she graduated, there was no time to celebrate. She needed to study for the bar exam. Then she needed the right clothes for interviews. Then she needed a car befitting a young attorney. The expenses piled up like snow against a door. This house is perfect, she declared 3 years into our marriage, standing in the empty living room of a Victorian monstrosity neither of us could afford. We can entertain here. Make connections. It's not just a home, it's a statement. I saw the mortgage papers, ran the numbers, knew we couldn't swing it. But her family had already started planning the housewarming. Don't be so negative, Calvin said, clapping me on the shoulder. A man provides. That's what men in this family do. So I signed. And worked more hours. And signed again when Silas needed investors for his tech startup. It's going to be the next big thing, he assured me, eyes gleaming with the fervor of the perpetually unsuccessful. 10,000 now, 50,000 return in a year. 2 tops. The company folded in 8 months. My money vanished like smoke. Silas never mentioned it again. Then came Penny's dental work. Evelyn's car. Calvin's heart surgery, the private room, the specialist flown in from Boston, the at-home nurse I paid for 3 months afterward. Family takes care of family, Evelyn reminded me as I wrote the checks. You're blessed to be able to help, Joel. So blessed. I nodded and smiled and died a little inside. Each time I filed away another receipt, another bank statement. Not sure why at first. Protection, perhaps. Or just proof that I wasn't imagining things. The breaking point came last summer. Clarissa wanted to open a spa. Upscale, exclusive, catering to the wealthy women in her social circle. All she needed was my signature on a $200,000 business loan. It's a guaranteed success, she insisted, pushing the papers across our kitchen table. Everyone says so. I looked up from the documents. Who's everyone? My friends? Mom. Dad's golf buddies. She waved dismissively. People who understand business. For the first time in our marriage I said no. Simply, clearly no. The transformation was immediate. Her face hardened, eyes narrowing to slits. I see, she said, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. So when it's your wife asking, suddenly you can't find your pen? Clarissa, we're already stretched thin. The house, your student loans? My father was right about you, she cut in. You talk about partnership, but when it matters you're selfish. A real husband would support my dreams. She swept from the room, phone already pressed to her ear. Within hours the text started coming. From Silas, heard you're being difficult. From Evelyn, Clarissa is heartbroken. From Calvin, we need to talk, son. Man to man. That night I found her laptop open on the bed. She'd forgotten to log out of her email. I wasn't looking for anything, was about to close it when I saw the subject line, Joel problem. I read it. Then another. And another. Years of correspondence about me. Plans, strategies, discussions of how to manage me. How to extract maximum value before the inevitable split. They'd been planning my exit for years, calculating down to the dollar what they could get from me before cutting me loose. That's when I started keeping my own records. Methodically, meticulously. Every penny they'd taken. Every manipulation. Every lie. As I drove away from the Thanksgiving disaster, snow swirling in my headlights, I felt oddly peaceful. I'd lived 10 years as their ATM. But I wouldn't spend one more day as their fool. I didn't make it to the door before Clarissa's scream pierced the dining room. The sound froze me mid-stride, a primal wail that seemed to shake the crystal chandelier above the dinner table. I turned back, one hand still on the doorknob. Clarissa stood trembling, the folder's contents spilled across the table, pages landing amongst half-eaten pumpkin pie and congealing gravy. Her perfectly manicured fingers clutched a spreadsheet, knuckles white with tension. "What is this?" she hissed, voice barely above a whisper now. "What have you done?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Nothing compared to what you've all done." Silas lunged for the papers, curiosity overcoming his usual calculated demeanor. He snatched a document from beside the turkey platter, eyes widening as he scanned the contents. $94,000? His voice cracked. "Over 8 years? $94,612, I corrected. "And that's just what I could document. The actual number is likely higher." Calvin rose from his seat at the head of the table, authority radiating from his stiff posture. "What exactly are you implying, Joel?" "I'm not implying anything," I replied, stepping back into the room. "I'm stating facts. Every penny your family has extracted from me is documented there. Every emergency, every investment opportunity, every short-term loan that somehow never got repaid." Brielle, never one to miss drama, grabbed another sheet. Her eyes grew round as dinner plates. "What are these screenshots?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Text messages, emails, social media. All the little conversations you thought were private." The color drained from Clarissa's face as Brielle began to read aloud. "Joel is such a walking idiom. I just bat my eyelashes and the checkbook appears." Brielle's voice faltered, then continued. "He's working late again. More money for us to play with this weekend." Silas grabbed another page. "From Penny to Clarissa. He's too stupid to realize we're using him. How long are you going to keep this going?" Clarissa's response had been, "As long as the money flows. Daddy says another 2 years max before we cut him loose." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. "You spied on me?" Clarissa finally managed, her voice quavering between outrage and fear. "On all of us?" I shook my head. "No need to spy. You left it all in plain sight. Unlocked phones. Open laptops. Conversations in this very dining room when you thought I was upstairs sleeping. You never bothered to hide your contempt because you never truly saw me as a person." Calvin slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "This is invasion of privacy. These records can't be legal." I laughed, the sound hollow in the high-ceilinged room. "Everything in that folder was obtained legally. All your family's little schemes laid bare. But please, by all means, challenge its legality. I'm sure a judge would be fascinated by the contents." Evelyn, who had remained silent until now, folded her hands carefully on the tablecloth. "Joel," she began, her voice deceptively gentle, "how long have you been planning this retaliation?" "Retaliation?" I considered the word. "No, Evelyn. This isn't retaliation. It's documentation. And I've been collecting it for as long as I've known what you truly think of me." I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen and turned it toward them. A recording played, Clarissa's voice crystal clear. "He's hanging by a thread financially. Once we clean out the joint accounts, he'll have nothing. No savings, no house, no family." Clarissa's face contorted with fury. "Turn that off." "That was 3 weeks ago," I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "In this very house. At a family meeting I wasn't invited to." Silas studied me with newfound wariness as if seeing me for the first time. "You were never this calculating before." "I learned from experts," I replied. Brielle, never able to read a room, laughed nervously. "Well, this is all a bit dramatic, isn't it? I mean, families have their issues." "This isn't issues," I cut her off. "This is systematic exploitation. And it ends tonight." Clarissa stepped toward me, arms outstretched, her face suddenly soft and vulnerable, the expression she used when she needed something. "Joel, baby, we can talk about this. Whatever you think you heard or saw, it's just misunderstandings." I stepped back, maintaining distance. "There's nothing to misunderstand about walking ATM, or too stupid to realize we're using him." Her eyes hardened again, mask slipping. "What do you want? Money? Revenge? Is that what this pathetic display is about?" "I want nothing from any of you," I said, the truth of it settling in my chest like a weight being lifted. "Not anymore." Calvin started to speak, but Evelyn touched his arm, silencing him. Her eyes never left my face. "How long, Joel?" she asked again. "How long have you been waiting to do this to us?" I considered her question, the genuine confusion in her voice. Even now she couldn't see it, how they were the ones who had done something to me, not the other way around. "Long enough," I said finally, "to see all of you clearly. Long enough to know what family really means to you." I turned back toward the door, the snow and the night and whatever uncertain future awaited me. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said again, and this time no one tried to stop me. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I made my way to the car. Behind me, the shouts from the dining room grew louder. I wasn't meant to hear them, or perhaps I was. Either way, curiosity got the better of me. I paused by the bay window, obscured by darkness and falling snow, and watched the drama unfold. Through the glass, I could see Silas still rifling through the papers, his expression shifting from smug to shocked to something approaching panic. He held up what looked like a hotel receipt, waving it in Clarissa's face. "What's this?" His voice was muffled by the window, but I could make out the words. "Who the hell is Rachel S.?" My stomach clenched. This was the part one hadn't planned on revealing tonight, or ever really. The receipt had slipped in with the financial records. A careless mistake on my part, but perhaps a fortuitous one. Clarissa snatched at the paper, but Silas pulled it away, holding it up to the light like a winning lottery ticket. "Charleston Harbor Hotel," he read aloud. 3 nights. Room service. Spa treatments. His eyes narrowed to slits. All charged to Joel's credit card. Clarissa's face, already pale, turned the color of the untouched dinner napkins. "Give me that," she hissed, lunging for the paper again. Silas sidestepped her, continuing his impromptu recitation. "Guest names, Clarissa Harrington and Rachel Sanders." He looked up, triumph in his eyes. "Rachel Sanders? Isn't that your yoga instructor?" The room erupted. From my vantage point, I could see Calvin rising from his chair, face contorted with rage. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock. Brielle started laughing, a high nervous sound that cut through the chaos. "An affair." Brielle's voice rose above the others. "You said this marriage was rock solid." Silas turned on his sister, waving the receipt like a prosecutor with damning evidence. "She's been having an affair. She's been screwing around on the side, and he's got proof." I watched Clarissa's face transform, the practiced mask of indignation crumbling into raw panic. She glanced toward the window, and for a moment I thought she'd spotted me. But her eyes swept past, searching for escape, finding none. Evelyn's face was a study in conflicted emotions, shock competing with calculation. Even in crisis, she was measuring angles, assessing damage. Calvin said nothing, his silence more damning than any words could be. "It's not what it looks like," Clarissa finally managed, her voice thin and reedy. "It looks like you charging a romantic weekend with your yoga instructor to your husband's credit card," Silas shot back. "Please enlighten us on what it actually is." I stepped away from the window then, not needing to see more. The memory of discovering that receipt played in my mind as I walked to my car. It had been 3 months ago. A casual check of our credit card statement. Something I'd begun doing religiously after noticing unusual charges. The hotel bill had jumped out. 3 nights, over $2,000 in charges. When I'd asked Clarissa about it, she'd smiled that silky smile of hers. "Yoga retreat in Charleston," she'd said, kissing my cheek. "I told you about it weeks ago. You never listen." I had listened. I always listened. But there had been no mention of any retreat. The next day, I'd called the hotel, pretending to confirm a booking. "Yes, for Harrington and Sanders," I'd said, the names bitter on my tongue. "Of course, sir," the cheerful receptionist had replied. "The couple in the Harbor View suite." Couple. Not roommates. Not retreat attendees. Couple. I'd thanked her and hung up, something cold and final settling in my chest. That night, I'd watched Clarissa texting, smiling at her phone screen. When I'd asked who she was messaging, she'd said, "Just Rachel. Yoga stuff." I never confronted her. Never asked about Rachel Sanders with her toned arms and knowing smile. I'd seen them together once at a coffee shop downtown, heads bent close, fingers brushing when they thought no one was looking. I'd walked away unseen, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Now, as I slid into my car, I could hear the shouting from the house growing louder. The perfect family portrait was shattering, fault lines exposed. For years, they'd used me as their financial cushion, their safety net, their personal bank. But Clarissa's betrayal was different, a crack in their united front. I started the engine, watching snow melt on the windshield. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction, seeing them turn on each other like wolves. But mostly I felt tired. Bone-deep, soul-level tired. As I pulled away from the estate, my headlights caught Silas storming out the front door, shouting something I couldn't hear. Brielle followed, tugging at his arm. Behind them, framed in the doorway, stood Clarissa, her face a mask of fury and fear. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. I could have sworn I saw something like regret flicker across her features. Then she turned away, slamming the door against the night and the snow and me. I drove on, leaving behind the house, the family, and the decade of lies. The folder had done its work, not just exposing their schemes to me but to each other. Sometimes the truth is its own revenge. And now, finally, I was free. My car slid slightly on the icy driveway as headlights flashed behind me. I checked the rearview mirror to see Silas running after me, slipping and stumbling through the snow. His breath fogged in the cold air as he waved frantically for me to stop. For a moment, I considered accelerating, leaving him and all of this behind. But something, curiosity perhaps, or the last embers of what I once thought was family, made me tap the brakes. I powered down the window just enough to hear him. "That's it?" he panted, hands on his knees. "You drop a bomb like that and just drive away? What else is there to say?" I asked. "Look, Joel," he straightened, adopting the reasonable tone he used to close business deals. "This thing with Clarissa, it's bad, I admit. None of us knew about the affair." The word seemed to physically pain him. "But that doesn't mean we all—" "Stop," I cut him off. "Just stop." I reached into my bag and pulled out a second envelope, thinner than the folder but somehow heavier with finality. I held it out the window. "What's that?" Silas asked, making no move to take it. "Severance package," I replied. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Severance? That's what this is, isn't it? The family terminating my employment." My voice remained steady, detached. "Take it. It concerns all of you." Hesitantly, he took the envelope, fingers trembling slightly. Whether from cold or emotion I couldn't tell. "We should discuss this inside," he said. "It's freezing out here." I shook my head. "Nothing to discuss." Despite my words, I put the car in park and stepped out. Not to follow him back to the warmth of the house, but because I wanted to see their faces when they opened the second envelope. Call it closure, or pettiness, or simply human curiosity. We walked back silently, footsteps crunching in the newly fallen snow. The front door opened before we reached it. Clarissa stood there, mascara tracking down her cheeks, eyes wild and red-rimmed. "Joel," she began, voice hoarse. I brushed past her without acknowledgement, heading back to the dining room where Calvin and Evelyn remained at the table, surrounded by the scattered contents of the first folder. Brielle paced by the fireplace, phone clutched in her hand, no doubt documenting the family drama for later sharing. "He brought more," Silas announced, holding up the envelope. Calvin looked up, face ashen. "More what?" "Severance package," I answered, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "Since I'm no longer family, I thought we should make it official." Clarissa snatched the envelope from Silas, tearing it open with shaking hands. Her eyes scanned the first page, growing wider with each line. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have." She flipped to the next page, then the next, panic rising visibly. "You've removed me from all our accounts? Cancelled our joint credit cards?" "Yes." "You've revoked my parents' power of attorney?" Her voice rose in disbelief. "Also yes." "My name is still on the house deed," she said, a hint of triumph creeping in. "For now," I agreed. "But you'll find the mortgage has been paid off as of yesterday. The property taxes are covered through next year. After that." I shrugged. "You're on your own." Evelyn pushed herself up from the table, face stretched in disbelief. "Joel, please. We're still your family." "Not according to your vote," I reminded her. Calvin finally found his voice. "This is illegal. You can't cut her off like this." "I consulted 3 separate attorneys," I replied. "Everything is perfectly legal." Clarissa's face crumpled, a new strategy emerging. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" "That sounds like a you problem," I said, echoing the phrase she'd used when I'd objected to paying for Silas's 4th failed business venture. "You're cutting us all off," she screamed, papers fluttering from her hands. I nodded. It seemed appropriate, given the circumstances. Evelyn stepped forward, hands outstretched in supplication. "Joel, please. We're still your family despite misunderstandings." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had welcomed me to Thanksgiving dinner for 10 years, who had called me son, while plotting to drain my accounts. "No," I said quietly. "You're not." Silas, ever the opportunist, sensed weakness and pounced. "You'll regret this," he warned, moving closer. "We have connections. The social fallout alone." "From what?" I interrupted. "The revelation that you voted me out of the family? Or that Clarissa has been having an affair? Please share that with everyone we know." His mouth snapped shut. Clarissa made one last attempt, moving toward me with that practiced vulnerable expression. "Where are you going to go?" she asked, voice deliberately small. I shouldered my bag, taking a final look around the dining room where this family had just revealed their true nature to me one last time. "Away," I said simply. "From what?" Calvin demanded, rising from his chair. "From responsibilities? Commitments? From this?" I gestured around the room at all of them. "From the lies, the manipulation, the endless taking." I moved toward the door, feeling strangely light despite the weight of a decade of deception. "Joel," Clarissa called after me, voice cracking. "Don't do this." I stopped at the threshold, turned back one last time. They made a tableau of stunned disbelief. The family that had used me standing amidst the evidence of their betrayal, still somehow shocked that their actions had consequences. "It's already done," I said, and stepped out into the night, leaving behind everything I thought I'd wanted, everything I thought I'd had, and taking with me only the certainty that whatever came next would be entirely my own. The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness as I left the main highway, turning onto the gravel road that wound through pine trees. The navigation system lost signal, but I didn't need it anymore. 3 turns and a gentle climb later, the cabin appeared, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. I hadn't looked back once since leaving the estate. Hadn't checked my phone, though I felt it buzzing persistently in my pocket. Some bridges aren't meant to be repaired once burned. The cabin key was exactly where the rental agent had said it would be, tucked in a lockbox on the porch railing. My fingers were numb with cold as I fumbled with the combination. 4792. The same as my house alarm code. The irony wasn't lost on me. The door creaked open, revealing darkness and the musty smell of a place closed up for too long. I stepped inside, bag dropping heavily to the floor. For several minutes I just stood there, listening to the perfect silence, a quiet unmarred by expectation or demand. I'd rented this place 2 weeks ago, after finding the emails about the family's vote. A small, remote cabin on the shores of Lake Arrowhead. No neighbors for a half-mile in any direction. Poor cell reception. Spotty internet. Paradise. Eventually, I found the light switch, illuminating a simple space. Stone fireplace, worn leather sofa, small kitchen with dated appliances. Knotty pine walls gave it a warm glow despite the chill. I checked the thermostat, 55 degrees, and cranked it up. The bedroom was small, just a full-sized bed with a patchwork quilt and a nightstand. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub that had seen better days. The place wasn't fancy, wasn't designed to impress anyone. It was just shelter, warmth, safety. Everything I needed. I unpacked quickly, a few clothes, toiletries, laptop, the books I'd been meaning to read for years but never found the time. No pictures. No mementos. Those had been left behind, casualties of my escape. By midnight, I had a fire crackling in the fireplace, a mug of instant coffee steaming in my hands. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, dusting the small porch and the trees beyond. I sat on the sofa watching flames dance and realized I couldn't remember the last time I had simply sat, without purpose or obligation. The first night I slept dreamlessly, deeper than I had in years. Morning brought pale sunlight filtering through pine trees, casting long shadows across fresh snow. I made more instant coffee and took it to the small porch, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. The lake stretched before me, still and gray beneath a winter sky. A pair of ducks skimmed across the surface, leaving rippled trails behind them. That first day I did nothing. Absolutely nothing. No emails, no calls, no chores, no tasks. I watched the lake. I read a few pages of a novel. I dozed on the sofa. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket, healing in its completeness. The second day followed a similar pattern. And the third. I chopped wood I found stacked behind the cabin, the physical exertion clearing my mind. I built fires and watched them burn down to embers. I walked along the lakeshore, boots crunching on frozen gravel. It wasn't until the 4th day that I finally checked my phone. 37 missed calls. 63 text messages. 29 voicemails. All from Clarissa, her parents, Silas. Even Penny had reached out, her message predictably self-serving. "Whatever happened, we can work it out. By the way, I need that dental insurance info." I scrolled through the texts without reading them fully. Clarissa's progression was predictable. Shock, anger, threats, bargaining, false remorse. The last one from her simply read, "Joel, I sent the divorce papers. You're being served." I deleted it along with all the others. Then I blocked her number. Evelyn's messages were more cunning, appealing to my sense of duty. "Clarissa is in a terrible state, and Calvin's health has taken a turn," followed by, "Please come back and fix this." Fix this? As if their decade of exploitation was a leaky faucet I could mend with the right tools. I blocked her too. The cabin had a small TV with spotty reception and a collection of DVDs from at least a decade ago. That night, I watched an old western, the simple morality of cowboys and outlaws, a refreshing change from the complex web of deception I'd left behind. By the end of the first week, I'd established a routine of sorts. Coffee at dawn, watching the lake come alive. Reading by the fire. Long walks in the afternoon. Simple meals. Early sleep, deep and restful. I hadn't thought about what came next. Didn't need to yet. For the first time in a decade, I was living fully in the present moment, unconcerned with managing someone else's crisis or fulfilling someone else's dreams. The cabin by the lake wasn't just a refuge, it was a reset. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and gold, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this steady, this calm. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. The solitude wasn't empty, it was full of possibility. My phone buzzed. A text from Clarissa. "Joel, this is ridiculous. We were meant to be a family. You need to stop this childish disappearing act." I read it once, then powered off the phone completely, slipping it into a drawer in the bedroom. Outside, an owl called softly from the trees. The lake rippled with the evening breeze. The world continued to turn without Clarissa's permission, without her family's machinations. And so did I. Christmas Eve arrived with a soft snowfall that transformed the landscape into something from a greeting card. Nearly a month had passed since Thanksgiving night, a month of quiet days and peaceful nights, of healing and reflection. I'd extended my stay at the cabin through January, unwilling to face the world just yet. I spent the morning watching snow gather on the pine branches outside my window, sipping coffee that had improved since those first days of instant powder. I'd ventured into the small town 15 minutes away for groceries and had found a local roast that tasted like heaven compared to what I'd been drinking. The cabin was warmer now, more lived in. I'd added a few touches, a better reading lamp, a thicker rug by the fireplace, a decent coffee maker. Small comforts that made the place feel like my own. As twilight settled over the lake, I built a fire in the hearth, larger than usual to ward off the deepening cold. I uncorked a bottle of simple red wine. Nothing fancy, just something I'd picked up on my last supply run. The liquid gleamed ruby in the firelight as I poured it into a mismatched glass from the cabin's sparse collection. I hadn't decorated for Christmas. There were no stockings hanging from the mantel, no tree glittering in the corner, no wrapped presents waiting to be opened. Just the fire, the wine, and the silence. The silence was disrupted by the chime of my phone, the new one I'd purchased after leaving the old one powered off in the drawer for 2 weeks. Only a handful of people had this number. My employer, from whom I'd taken an extended leave of absence, the cabin's owner, and my newly hired attorney. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be one of them. Instead, there was a notification from my email, the only account I hadn't yet abandoned from my old life. I hesitated, then opened it. It was from Evelyn. Somehow, despite everything, they'd found a way to reach me. Attached was a photo of their living room, decked out in its usual Christmas excess. The tree touched the ceiling, dripping with ornaments collected over decades. Presents spilled out across the floor, wrapped in coordinating paper with elaborate bows. The message read simply, "It's not the same without you." I zoomed in on the photo, noting the small pile of gifts labeled with my name. A performance for my benefit, no doubt. Or perhaps they genuinely couldn't comprehend that I was gone for good. Before I could delete it, another email arrived, this one from Clarissa. Ellie misses her uncle. The photo showed Silas's daughter, 5 years old and gap-toothed, holding a clumsily wrapped present presumably for me. I felt the familiar tug of obligation, the conditioned response to their emotional manipulation. Then a third email arrived, dropping any pretense. "We're also falling behind on the house payments. The bank is calling." There it was. First the emotional appeal, then the request for money. Their playbook hadn't changed even now. I deleted all 3 emails without responding and blocked the addresses. Yet something uneasy had settled in my chest, disrupting the peace I'd cultivated. I thought about last Christmas, hauling in presents, fixing strands of lights that Silas was too impatient to troubleshoot, playing Santa for Ellie while everyone else drank eggnog in the kitchen. I'd believed I was part of something. That the effort and sacrifice meant connection, belonging. What a foolish thing to believe. I refilled my wine glass and moved to the small porch despite the cold. The night was clear now, snow having given way to a sky blazing with stars. The lake reflected their light, a mirror of infinity below matching the one above. In those moments of quiet reflection, I realized something profound. This was the first Christmas Eve in years where I felt genuinely at peace. No performance required. No wallet constantly opening. No navigating the minefield of family politics and expectations. Just silence, stillness, and the space to breathe. I thought about Ellie, the one innocent in all this. I'd send her something after the holidays, directly to her school perhaps. The rest of them would get nothing more from me, not money, not time, not emotional energy. I stayed on the porch until my wine turned cold and my fingers grew numb. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human dramas playing out beneath them. The lake lay still and perfect, ice forming along its edges. As midnight approached, marking the transition to Christmas Day, I raised my glass to the empty chair beside me. "Merry Christmas to me," I said aloud, my voice strange in the silence. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant it. This solitary celebration, free from the weight of false family and obligation, was more genuine than any elaborately staged holiday I'd endured in the past decade. I returned inside as the clock struck 12, closing the door on the world beyond the cabin. Tomorrow would be just another day, peaceful, quiet, mine. I'd make pancakes perhaps. Read by the fire. Walk along the frozen lakeshore if the weather permitted. Simple pleasures that were worth more than all the wrapped presents under the Harrington family tree. Because they were real. Because they were chosen, not coerced. Because they were mine. I fell asleep that night to the gentle crackle of the dying fire, dreamless and content, while miles away, a family that had voted me out wondered why their carefully crafted messages had failed to bring their walking ATM back into the fold. Their confusion was no longer my concern. January arrived with bitter winds and the realization that my retreat couldn't last forever. My leave of absence was running out, and while the cabin had served its purpose as sanctuary, it wasn't a sustainable long-term solution. The real world waited beyond the pine trees and frozen lake, demanding my eventual return. I packed my few belongings on a Sunday morning, the sun casting long shadows across fresh snow. The cabin looked almost exactly as it had when I arrived. Simple, unadorned, peaceful. I'd leave few traces behind, save for the stack of split wood I'd replenished for the next occupant. Before leaving, I stood on the porch one last time, committing the view to memory, the expanse of icy lake, the surrounding forest, the big sky above. This place had given me something precious, the space to find myself again beneath the layers of obligation and expectation I'd accumulated over a decade of serving others' needs. The drive back to civilization felt like crossing a border into a foreign country. Road signs, traffic lights, people bustling along sidewalks, it all seemed strangely frenetic after my weeks of solitude. I checked into a modest motel at the edge of town, a temporary base while I searched for more permanent housing. The room was clean but impersonal, beige walls, floral bedspread, mass-produced landscape print above the bed. A way station, not a destination. That first night back among the living, my sleep was restless, interrupted by the unfamiliar sounds of doors closing, conversations in the hallway, traffic on the nearby street. I'd grown too accustomed to the quiet of the lake, the gentle rhythm of nature. Morning brought a renewed sense of purpose. I had appointments with a realtor, a meeting with HR about returning to work, and a consultation with my attorney regarding the divorce proceedings Clarissa had initiated. Life, in all its complicated glory, was demanding my attention again. My phone remained blessedly silent from their numbers. The blocking had worked, or perhaps they'd finally gotten the message. Either way, the reprieve was welcome. But they were resourceful, I had to give them that. 3 days after my return, I answered a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Harrington?" The voice was professionally neutral. "I'm calling about the family trust." I nearly hung up, assuming it was another of their ploys. But something in the caller's tone made me hesitate. "I'm not involved with any family trust," I replied carefully. "Sir, we have documentation listing you as a beneficiary of the Calvin Harrington Living Trust. Given recent developments, your presence is requested at a meeting to discuss your status." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "I'm sure it is, sir." "Tell Calvin nice try," I said and ended the call. The next day, returning to the motel after a long day of apartment hunting, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. The handwriting was Evelyn's, elegant cursive I'd recognize anywhere. How she'd found me I couldn't guess. Perhaps she'd hired someone. Perhaps the town was smaller than I thought. I should have thrown it away unopened. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and broke the seal. 3 pages of pleading, of "You've always been the strong one," and "Clarissa is alone, crying every night." Interspersed with the emotional appeals were the predictable financial requests. "We're drowning in the mortgage payments, and the bank is threatening foreclosure. The final paragraph cut to the chase. Please, for your father-in-law's sake. One last time. I read the letter twice, waiting for the familiar surge of guilt or sense of duty to rise in my chest. Nothing came. The words on the page might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the emotional response they evoked. I crumpled the pages and tossed them in the wastebasket, then went across the street to the diner for dinner. I ordered a BLT and coffee, ate mindfully at the counter, and thought about the apartment I'd seen that afternoon. It was small but well-maintained, with large windows and a decent kitchen. The landlord seemed straightforward, the rent reasonable. I'd put down a deposit before leaving. A fresh start, away from the ghosts of my past life. Back at the motel, I checked my new email, the one connected only to my job and new beginnings. My boss had confirmed my return date. The realtor had sent listings of potential long-term rentals. My attorney had updates on the divorce proceedings, which were progressing smoothly given that I'd contested nothing, asked for nothing, simply wanted it over. I fell asleep that night to the sound of light rain against the window, thoughts turning not to what I'd left behind, but to what lay ahead. The job I'd return to, the apartment I'd make my own, the life I'd build, brick by careful brick, without the weight of others' expectations dragging me down. In the morning, I signed the lease on the apartment, bought a simple coffee maker for the kitchen, and scheduled a delivery for a new mattress. Small decisions, ordinary choices, unremarkable to anyone watching, but each one a declaration of independence, a statement of selfhood after years of servitude. When my phone rang again from an unknown number, I let it go to voicemail. Their problems were no longer mine to solve, their crises no longer mine to avert. The path forward was clear now, illuminated by the simple truth I'd discovered in that cabin by the lake. The most valuable thing I could give myself was not money or status or approval, but freedom. Freedom to choose. Freedom to breathe. Freedom to be. Spring arrived in a gentle cascade of green, the world reawakening from its winter slumber. March brought longer days and warmer temperatures, trees budding and early flowers pushing through soil still cool from the retreating frost. Nature was beginning anew, and so was I. My one-bedroom apartment had taken shape over the past 2 months. Nothing fancy, nothing designed to impress, just a space that was entirely mine. A comfortable sofa faced the window rather than a TV. Bookshelves held volumes I'd actually read, not leather-bound classics chosen for their appearance. The kitchen was simple but functional, perfect for the basic cooking skills I was slowly developing. I'd returned to work in February, accepting a position with reduced hours and responsibilities. The pay cut was substantial, but so was the reduction in stress. I found myself actually enjoying engineering again, tackling interesting problems without the constant pressure to earn more, to provide more, to be more for others. Twice weekly, I met with a therapist, a soft-spoken woman who asked hard questions. "What do you want for yourself?" she'd asked in our first session. "Quiet," I'd answered immediately. "Just quiet." She'd nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And now that you have it?" That question had hung in the air between us, unanswered for weeks. Now, as spring unfurled around me, I was beginning to find answers. I joined a weekend hiking group, a diverse collection of people united by their love of the outdoors. We trekked through late winter forests, along ridgelines still crisp with frost, beside streams swollen with melting snow. In these outings, I rediscovered something I'd lost long ago, the simple joy of movement, of camaraderie without expectation, of conversations that never veered toward what I could do for someone else. I'd reconnected with old friends, relationships that had withered during my years with Clarissa. Tom, my college roommate, had seemed genuinely pleased to hear from me. We'd met for beers, our conversation initially awkward with the weight of years apart, then gradually easing into familiar rhythms. "I tried to reach you, you know," he'd said, twisting his glass between calloused hands. "After you married her. You just disappeared." "I know," I'd replied, the simple acknowledgement a step toward repair. "I'm back now." The quiet of my new life sometimes felt profound in its ordinariness. No melodrama, no crises requiring immediate attention, no elaborate performances of family or success. Just days that unfolded at their own pace, filled with work, exercise, reading, occasional socializing, and generous helps of solitude. Last week, a letter had arrived from Clarissa, forwarded from our old address. It sat on my kitchen table for 2 days, unopened, a ghost from another life. When I finally tore the envelope, the message inside was brief, just 3 words: "We're still family." No request for money. No mention of the house or her parents or the divorce proceedings that were nearly finalized. Just those 3 words, like a spell she believed could still bind me to her. I'd expected to feel something, anger, perhaps, or the tug of nostalgia, or even a shadow of the guilt that had been my constant companion for so many years. Instead, I felt nothing. The words fell flat, meaningless as pebbles dropped into a still pond. I tossed the letter into the trash with yesterday's coffee grounds and an empty soup can. That evening, I texted Tom about fishing plans for April. Made a note to pick up more coffee beans. Checked the weather for Saturday's hike. Life continued, ordinary and peaceful, without the weight of Clarissa's expectations or her family's manipulations. The therapist would likely say this was progress, this ability to encounter triggers from my past without being pulled back into old patterns. She'd be right, of course. But it felt like more than progress, it felt like freedom. Tonight, I prepared a simple dinner, chicken breasted seasoned with herbs, rice, steamed vegetables. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would have impressed the Harringtons or their social circle. But it was nourishing, and I'd made it myself, and there was a quiet satisfaction in that basic competence. I ate at the small table I'd found at a second-hand store, sitting in a chair that was comfortable rather than stylish. Through the window, the last light of day painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Down on the street, people walked dogs, pushed strollers, carried groceries, ordinary lives unfolding in ordinary ways. As darkness fell, I washed my single plate, single glass, single set of utensils. Hung the dish towel to dry. Made a cup of tea. Settled into the sofa with a book I'd been meaning to read for years. The apartment was silent except for the occasional distant siren or the neighbor's muffled music. But it wasn't a hollow silence, not anymore. It was a silence filled with possibility, with choices that were mine alone to make. On the wall, I'd hung a few photographs from recent hikes, not designer artwork chosen to impress visitors, but memories of places I'd been, experiences I'd had. My own life, captured in images of mountain vistas, forest paths, loch shores at dawn. Tomorrow would bring work, perhaps a drink with Tom afterward, a walk if the weather held. Small things. Good things. My things. Not survival within someone else's chaos, but the steady building of a life that belonged wholly to me. The chicken sizzled in the pan, filling my small kitchen with the aroma of garlic and herbs. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, a spring shower washing the world clean. I stirred the rice, adjusted the heat under the vegetables, and felt a peculiar sense of accomplishment in this simple domestic act. 6 months had passed since that fateful Thanksgiving night. 6 months since I'd walked away from a decade of manipulation and exploitation. The divorce was final now, the legal ties to Clarissa and her family severed as cleanly as a surgeon's incision. What remained was healing, the slow, steady process of reclaiming myself. My therapist had asked during our session yesterday, "What does freedom mean to you, Joel?" I'd considered the question carefully before answering. Not having to constantly calculate what others want from me. Not having to anticipate the next crisis. Just being able to breathe. She'd nodded, jotting something in her notebook. "And how does that freedom feel?" "Quiet," I'd said. "But a good quiet. Like the difference between silence because no one wants to hear you and silence because there's peace." Now, as I plated my dinner and sat at the second-hand table I'd bought at a garage sale, I reflected on that conversation. The table wobbled slightly, I'd need to adjust the legs soon. In my previous life, such imperfection would have been unacceptable, a source of embarrassment when the right people came to dinner. Now, it was simply a minor issue to be fixed when I had time. My phone buzzed. Tom asking if I wanted to grab a beer after work tomorrow. I texted back an affirmative, adding that I'd heard about a new hiking trail we should try this weekend. Our rekindled friendship had been one of the unexpected gifts of my new life. Easy, undemanding, genuine. As I ate, I glanced around my apartment. It wasn't large or luxurious, nothing like the showplace home I'd shared with Clarissa. The furniture was mismatched, chosen for comfort rather than appearance. Books filled the shelves, not carefully curated for visitors' impressions, but dog-eared paperbacks and well-worn hardcovers I actually read and enjoyed. On the wall hung a few framed photographs from recent hikes. A sunrise over distant mountains, a mist-covered lake reminiscent of my refuge after Thanksgiving, a narrow trail winding through a spring-green forest. Not expensive art selected by a decorator, but moments from my own life, captured and preserved. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the small balcony outside. I finished my dinner, washed the dishes and made a cup of tea. These simple rituals had become touchstones in my new existence, unremarkable to anyone watching, but deeply satisfying in their quiet ordinariness. My therapist had suggested journaling, and though I'd resisted at first, I'd found unexpected solace in the practice. I opened the leather-bound notebook on my desk, a gift to myself rather than an obligation to another, and began to write. Today marks 6 months since I walked away. 6 months of rebuilding, of finding myself beneath the layers of expectation and obligation I'd accumulated over a decade. The strangest realization isn't how much I've changed, but how much I've returned to who I was before. Before Clarissa, before her family, before I became someone whose value was measured only in what I could provide for others. I paused, considering what to write next. Beyond the windows, the city lights blurred in the rain, creating halos of color against the darkening sky. My reflection looked back at me, older, perhaps, with new lines around my eyes, but steadier, more certain. I continued writing. I spoke with my boss today about taking on the Richardson project. It's the kind of challenge I used to live for, before engineering became merely a means to fund Clarissa's ambitions. He seemed surprised by my interest but pleased. I start next month. I've been thinking about the cabin by the lake. Not as a refuge this time, but as a destination. Perhaps I'll rent it again in summer, when the water is warm enough for swimming and the trails are clear for longer hikes. Not to hide but to enjoy. Tom mentioned his sister's friend who recently moved to town, a botanist studying urban ecology. He's hinted at introducing us, not pushing, just suggesting. A year ago, even 6 months ago, I would have refused outright. Now, I find myself curious, open to the possibility. Not rushing, not desperate, just open. I set down my pen, the words trailing off not in uncertainty but in possibility. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle patter, the kind that nourishes rather than destroys. I moved to my small balcony, just large enough for a single chair, and stood watching the wet world below. People hurried along the sidewalk, collars turned up against the rain, heading home or out for the evening. A couple shared an umbrella, leaning into each other. A woman walked her dog, unconcerned by the shower. Ordinary lives, ordinary moments, extraordinary in their simple authenticity. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with damp spring air. Tomorrow would bring work, perhaps that beer with Tom, a call to my sister whom I'd reconnected with after years of Clarissa's subtle discouragement of the relationship. The day after, who knew? That was the beauty of it. Each morning now arrived as a blank page, not pre-written by others' expectations or demands. My life stretched before me, not as a path dictated by someone else's needs, but as open territory to be explored at my own pace in my own way. I remained on the balcony until the rain stopped and stars appeared between breaking clouds. Inside, my small apartment waited, warm and welcoming. Not a showcase for others, but a sanctuary for myself. Not grand or impressive, but mine in all the ways that mattered. Free from their burden, I turned toward home.